the biggest investment you can make is the people that you do your thinking with and what you choose to talk about. My husband and I have always prioritized time together to think expansively. And that sounds weird because it makes it sound like we're sat down going, so what's our 10-year vision? And we don't consciously sit down and have like a checklist that we're going through, but we have boundaries and we dedicate time to this. Welcome to Rich Work, the podcast for established female entrepreneurs ready to turn their expertise into premium clients and consistent high-ticket revenue. I'm Rachel Pearson, global brand and business strategist, skincare obsessed, and always distracted by booking the next mini break. Here you'll learn how to position like a luxury brand, attract clients who love to invest, and build wealth that actually lasts, so you can create the business and life you want, not someone else's version of success. This is where premium positioning and building wealth meet for women who are rewriting the rules. Let's get into it. Today's episode is different. It is not about strategy or anything to do with business, but is also the thing that is going to make you the most money in your business and is going to make your strategy work for you. Today, I'm going to be sharing more of a personal take on how I have built wealth through the way that I think. And this isn't manifestation in the traditional sense or the way that you may have heard about it before. It is about a belief system that I hold that may inspire you to think differently about the way that you approach money and the way that you build money into wealth. There is no right or wrong way of being able to build wealth because wealth means very different things to different people, as I've talked about in a previous episode. But my intention with today is that you hear how I think about my own wealth, which is something that I don't feel is talked about enough. Often we are told about what has happened as, ta-da, this is the result, this is what I've got, and then the before of where somebody used to be. But the thing that will shift your way of doing things, the way that you think that will inspire you to do something differently is that messy middle in between. So today I am showing up here as someone who you maybe know as a business strategist, as somebody who is quite geeky about the strategy side of things, but I'm also very attuned with my belief system, my energy, I'm highly perceptive and intuitive to following what I think is a thread. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to me. And so what I share today might not be the logical, and then suddenly everything happened. It's not meant to be that. It's the threads that I followed in my own life that have enabled me to create, honestly, things that I never imagined that I would create. I am a business strategist, but I'm also a woman, a wife, a mother, a friend, a daughter, a sister. And I am someone who has built together with my husband, and I'm really transparent about that. It's not just me talking about building my own wealth, but I'm not sat here kind of piggybacking on the back of his wealth either. I have built together with my husband from a place of comfort to a place where we have freedom and wealth. To give you some context around that, I have never come from a place of extreme lack of money. And again, I'm very honest about this. I don't have a rags to riches story. I came from a really stable background. My parents are still together. My family is very close. I have a really beautiful story of my childhood and also a financially stable story from my childhood. And so I came from that place. However, with my husband have now leapt into a different stage and level of wealth that neither of us came from. So my husband and I both went to the same school. We didn't know each other at the time, but years and years later, and turns out we went to the same school, which is a whole nother story. We both went to a comprehensive school, so it wasn't a private school, and my boys are both in private school now. I'm not for or against either way, but this is my story coming through. Was we went to a very regular school, large school. There was a lot of unsavory not very nice stuff that went on there, at the same time as it being the best education that I could get, because it also really brought me a friendship group that I still have to this day. But we didn't come from any kind of financially like blow your mind wealth. And so we've been together for 16 years. In the last 16 years, we have built that into a nearly net worth value of 8 figures. So that covers our properties, it covers investments, it covers cash in the bank. I'm talking about our whole portfolio, but I'm also together with him, we are cash millionaires. And I say this really directly because in order for me to talk about this, you have to have trust in that I know how I've built it. I know how I've built it from a perspective of where to put, how to think about your money strategically. But everybody has opportunity to think about their money strategically. What they don't have opportunity to think about, or maybe what they're not thinking about, is who you have to become in order for this to happen. I'm not talking about a huge amount of time here. We've been married for 10 years this year. We've been together for 16. And when we met, we're not anywhere near being millionaires. So this is what I'm sharing in today's episode is highly personal to me in the way that I think, but is also the compound effect of what's happened in a relatively short space of time. This conversation, when I've heard it around how to build up wealth or even how to think in a more abundant way from people that have achieved a high level of wealth, always confuses me. And one of the things that confuses me about it is that a lot of the time it's the same things that I hear from people around stepping into doing things that you want to do in your future, or ways of living that you see in your future that you step into now rather than waiting for them to happen. And I am for that. I believe that your environment hugely shifts and influences how you act. And that's why the rooms that you put yourself in, the people that you surround yourself with are massively important. But the thing that confuses me is that that's not enough. I heard an example the other day, and I think it was somebody I follow on Instagram who was sharing around a book that she'd read where it was about a millionaire mindset. And it said that one of the things that she took from the book was to do things that take you out of the comfort level of the money that you're making right now, or the wealth that you have access to. And the example was to go to a restaurant where you see something that is at market price. So you'd often see this when you go to like a fish restaurant or it's steak, and it has something which is price of the day because it's the catch of the day, and it doesn't give you any set price. You're going on, I just want this and I can afford it. And she was saying that that's what she did. She went into a restaurant and she ordered off market price with the belief that that money will always come back. Now, I don't think that that is the way that you build up abundance, because if you put yourself into an environment where you buy expensive things, or let's use it in the online space and in the coaching space, if you invest in something like a mastermind or a coach, mentor, that is the biggest investment that you could make and is maybe way above what you are making now, and you're putting it on credit card and you're pulling in like all of your savings to do that with the belief that money will come back to you, then the piece that's missing from that is that you haven't built the internal resilience to trust that. So if you are sat in this restaurant and you've just bought this crazy expensive lobster and you are eating it, and what's going through your mind is, I'm not really enjoying this because this is so expensive and I don't really know how I'm going to pay for it in the future. Like I can pay for it now if I put it on my credit card, but how am I going to pay that off in the future? And then you come out the restaurant and all that's in your mind is, I've got to make money to be able to make that come back to me. That's not trusting in abundance. That is putting pressure on yourself because you have taken yourself out of the comfort level, dysregulated yourself around money because you haven't built the inner resilience at the same time. And so on the one hand, I do agree with putting yourself in environments that stretch you. That's something that I do consciously over and over again. Putting myself in conversations where I feel like I'm the smallest in the room, putting myself into conversations where I do not understand the topic at all, but I'm there to be expanded and to learn, even if I don't understand the technical side of it. Going to places where it expands my thinking. But at the same time, I'm also doing the inner work, which is around building the resilience to be able to hold it. And so I'm going to talk through some of the ways that I have approached that in my own life that has meant that my wealth has compounded over time. I haven't had a lot of money come in and then spent it straight away, or had a client come to work with me who is an ideal client and then self-sabotage by going back into selling my lowest priced offer because I'm thinking, well, how am I going to do that again? And the thing that I don't see people talking about, which is what we're going to go into today, is that you have to expand to hold the money. You cannot just take the action, otherwise you will contract straight after it. And so the shift isn't about what you spend, which is what the online space is really good at preaching about. Spend more to make more. Invest. If you want a £1 million business, you've got to invest at like 300K. It's like, actually, the amount isn't the thing we should be focused on here. It's the conditions under which you operate, which means that that amount makes sense. I've always approached looking at my money and how I spend and how I invest and how I approach my abundance through choice. It's not, can I afford this? But it's asking the question, what do I need to be true before I do this? And it's fundamentally different, those questions, because there's been times where I can absolutely afford to do something, but I know that personally, I'm not in the best space, maybe energetically or capacity wise, to be able to make the most of it. So I know that I don't have the true conditions in place to be able to make this work for me. And so therefore, even though I can technically afford it, I need to have the conditions in place so that I expand with it and that I don't just put money forward for something and then contract and, for example, invest in a hugely expensive mentorship program that I don't have capacity for right now, and then I never show up for it. I don't expand within that program because I just don't have the conditions to be able to do that. So let me give you some examples of how I've thought about this that will never be replicated in your own life, because this is my story and my truth, but hopefully will shift the way that you think about where you are putting your attention right now, where you're putting your energy. And maybe there's a different question that you could be asking yourself that is going to enable your relationship with money, your relationship with wealth to look different. So let's go way back, because it is way back for me now. So when I was in my early 20s, I was like 22, maybe 23. I'd moved to London with my boyfriend at the time, who was my boyfriend at the time, is not my husband. And it will become very clearly apparent why that is. And we lived in West Hampstead, which was a ridiculous choice for a 22-year-old. But my boyfriend had a job at a hedge fund. He was an analyst, not super high up, but it was a hedge fund. He was making really good money as a graduate straight out of university. I, on the other hand, had followed my heart and my passion and was working in marketing for the arts. So I worked at the Shakespeare Globe Theatre in London, and I was assistant to the head of marketing at St. Paul's Cathedral. So amazing experiences, but terrible, terrible pay. And our relationship at the time was not going to work out. It was very clear. And we went through a very difficult patch. And I went back to my parents for a weekend, and I came back to London, and he had moved out. He had moved out over the weekend, taken the furniture. You can start to get the gist of why he's not my husband right now. He had moved out, taken the furniture, and left me with the rest of the rent to pay on that lease. Now, thankfully, there wasn't that much to pay. There weren't that many months left on the lease, but I was in the situation where I had to use all my savings. My salary didn't nearly cover what I needed to pay. So I had to spend everything to just meet my commitments at that time. And then moved back to my parents in Worcestershire, because at that point my relationship had broken up. I was working in these amazing venues, experiences, but was not making enough money to live in London. And I really needed to figure out what I could do. So I moved back to my parents. And at that time, aged 22, 23, it was not the worst thing in the world. But for me, it really was a pivotal time because it shaped how I started to think about money, how I started to take accountability for where I had just not been thinking about my own money at all. I had let myself get into a situation where I was living with somebody who made good money, and the way that I could contribute was paying half the rent. But apart from that, I wasn't really living the lifestyle that I wanted to live because I didn't have any money left over. And I made the decision when I moved back to my parents and I was there for a few months that I wanted to move back to London, but I was not going to move back to London unless I had at least a year of savings for my rent to be able to move back. I didn't want to move back without having a choice. And that was what crucially has shaped everything around how I think about my money and my wealth now, is that I never want to be in the position where I don't have choice. Wealth for me is not about how much money you have. It is about the choice that you have. And I decided that I never wanted to be in a position where I couldn't choose where I lived, where I couldn't choose what job I went for, where I couldn't choose the lifestyle that I have, because I didn't have the financial means to be able to do it. And so I had to get creative then, because saving up to move back to London and with a year's worth of average rent at that time could take me a long time. So I got more creative about what I was going to do. And I thought, well, I do need a little bit of time as well to figure out what I want to do with my life. At age 22, you never really know what you want to do with your life, and that's fine. But I needed a bit of a plan for the future. So I decided to apply for a scholarship. I researched a lot of things that I could do. I'd done an English degree as my first degree, and I was interested in where that could go. And I found a scholarship that would cover me for a master's in publishing and intellectual property law, which was a new qualification, a new master's degree that was being done at UCL at the time. And so I applied for that scholarship like my life depended on it. I spent hours poring over the application form. Went out and did like free work experience to get experience under my belt. There was no way that I was not getting that scholarship. That scholarship covered my fees for my master's, and it also gave me a 10K grant to cover my rent in shared accommodation. So I had my year's worth. I had my tuition covered. I didn't have my expenses covered, but that was what I wanted. I wanted my rent covered. I wanted my ability to move back to London, and I did it. I would not have thought about doing a master's if I had not thought about changing my perception of the conditions that meant that moving back to London, making money had to work for me. So by choosing the conditions that money had to work differently for me, it completely changed the way I started to think about making money and led me to then getting a master's degree. And then, to be honest, set me on a completely different trajectory with my career and my business, because I then had that master's degree that opened up different doors. So that one decision made me more resourceful than any abundance exercise ever could do. And it's the start of when I started to think about what I call wealthy thinking. I wasn't buying expensive dinners and hoping that the universe provides me with the money back to be able to give me the opportunity to move back to London. I set the conditions under which I was willing to move forward, and then I got creative about how I was going to make that happen. The next thing that shifted, so this is when I'm back in London and I've done that master's degree and I'm now working in marketing. So I started off in advertising and then moved on into different areas of marketing and innovation from there. But still around the same sort of time, my mid to late 20s, I started to question, what do I want my life to look like? And not in a big way of I want to have a certain type of house or I want to have a certain car. It wasn't that kind of materialistic looking at life. I just knew that I wanted to never have to question whether I could afford things. And what that meant at 26 is very different to what it looks like now, but the principle has always been the same. So when I started to think in this way around, okay, what does choice look like for me? I recognized that having choice over a standard of my life, the experiences that I have, was more important to me than any short-term materialistic thing I could buy. I didn't have any designer clothes until I was well into my 30s. And I didn't have a nice bag, as in a bag that wasn't from just a high street brand. Like, I used to get my bags from like Accessorize for a long time. I think the first time that I had a designer bag was when I was 34. And by designer, I think it was a Mulberry bag, a small Mulberry bag. So it wasn't a Chanel, it wasn't like a Birkin, or it was a Mulberry bag, which is still expensive, but it's not like you have, extortionately expensive. I thought early on that my priority is not to have materialistic things. It's to travel, it's to see things, it's to experience things that will continue to change and expand how I think. So instead of buying things that would make me look like I was doing well, I started to create little investment pots. So this is when I was about 26, 25, 26. I would max out my ISA every year. I started to learn about financial strategy. I had no background in this, by the way. So my degree, as I mentioned, was in English literature. I had always been told at school that I was bad at numbers. I think I was in the top set for everything at school apart from maths. And I remember there was one time where I got 10%. I got 10% on my maths test. And I went in with my mum to see the teacher to say, please, can I have my test given out separately, not in front of the rest of the children in the class? Because I was so embarrassed. And he said, no, you have to have it given out to everybody. There was always been cringe moments through my life where I have felt like I am terrible at numbers. And the truth is that I'm not. It's just that I'm terrible at learning maths at school, because that's the maths that you never really need. But I didn't have a background and I didn't have a belief that I was good in numbers. And so rather than that being my story, I had to shift that for myself. So I started to read up around financial strategy, and I'm by no means an expert now, but I started to look at what is available to me rather than thinking I have to have to do everything at once and I have to do everything by myself. I just need to know how to ask the right questions. And that's always been something that I've been very focused on. And there's another thing that I think is key to wealthy thinking is learn how to ask better questions. It doesn't mean that you have to then put the things in place. So I started investing in very small ways into stocks and shares, and then using the surplus to fund the experiences that actually mattered to me, which were travel, holidays. And one of the things when I was planning out this episode that I'd never really connected before is that this is something that I really connected with my husband over when we first, from the very first date, actually, when we got together, is that shared understanding of experiences are more important than the materialistic. I met my husband at 26. This is exactly the same timing that I'm talking about when I started to think more and become more curious and educate myself more on financial strategy. I met my husband when I was 26. We started a date then. When we went on our third date, he told me that he was moving to Abu Dhabi. And instead of thinking, well, that was nice, I thought that was going somewhere, which was part of my thinking, I'll be honest. Third date in, you don't expect somebody to say, I'm moving to the other side of the world. It does make you think, what is wrong with me? But what I said was, okay, well, I will travel to make it work. And he felt exactly the same. And we did long distance then for 18 months. And I traveled a lot over there to see him. But because I'd already set the conditions where I had the financial abundance to travel like that. So do you start to see how things connect in? That it is, I believe, manifestation in a way, because if I hadn't set up these pots of money and really come to terms myself with my priority, my conditions of building wealth are around experiences and travel, then I wouldn't have had the money to be able to then go and travel to see him when he came into my life, when he moved across to the Middle East. I wouldn't have been able to do that. So time and time again, I have seen the reality reflected back to me because I have set the conditions for that reality to happen. And I'm not going to sit here and say that material things do not matter to me at all. I'm sat recording this episode in an amazing house. The house that I live in now is 8 times bigger than the house that we moved from, just to give you a sense of how we quantum leap. And that's another story in itself of how that came to happen. But I sit in this house that is incredible. I have beautiful cars. I do have designer clothes now. I have a stylist that I work with. I have a lot of material things that are beautiful, but the foundation for me has always been invest in what expands in how I think. When I invest in me and how I think and do not choose the things that already make me look like I'm there, like already make me look like I'm some version of success. That is what then enables my success to be beyond and blow up beyond what I even think it could be. So investing in how you think is the most important piece. That's why I will always talk about the rooms that you get yourself into, the conversations that you're around, the environments that you put yourself into above and beyond the fancy surplus things. Like, I don't know, for me, it's like, do you really need to go on a trip to a fancy retreat to be seen around people that are uber successful? If it doesn't expand my thinking, if I don't think I'm going to have great conversations there, then no, like that's not for me. And so this then leads into my third piece, which I've picked out to support how I'm going to share this with you, which is around expansive conversations. The one piece that people don't talk about because it sounds so simple, it is the biggest investment you can make is the people that you do your thinking with and what you choose to talk about. My husband and I have always prioritized time together to think expansively. And that sounds weird because it makes it sound like we're sat down going, so what's our 10-year vision? And we don't consciously sit down and have like a checklist that we're going through, but we have boundaries and we dedicate time to this. When we first got together, we would go for a walk every Sunday afternoon into evening. And sometimes these walks would go on for hours. There was no agenda. This was like pre-kids, so I didn't have anything to get back for. We just talked about what we wanted to build, what the future could look like. We had disagreements about things, but it was always this bigger picture thinking. And over time, that has naturally evolved. We have 2 young children. We don't have as much time anymore. We have more responsibilities, but we still prioritize going out for dinner regularly. And the rule, or the unspoken rule, is we don't talk about our children, which I know sounds quite unconventional because our children are our world, right? They are our lives, but we don't talk about household logistics, about whether we need a new shed. We do need a new shed, by the way. We don't talk about sweating the small stuff in those conversations. The dinner is where we talk about when we want to move house, our investment strategy, where we're going next, what we want the next phase to look like, what's important for him, where he doesn't feel like he's been able to pursue what's important for him individually, and I will do the same as well. And we also have that's expanded into multiple days that we have where we'll go away. We're going away together in June for 3 nights where we're going away, and we will have these kind of conversations together. Because my business and his career are at a stage where there's genuine surplus, there's high growth in both. Those conversations have become now more specific. So recently we were talking about our next house move. We've been in this house for 6 years and it was a significant step up. But the conversation isn't, can we afford to move? We've now covered our retirement planning. We've got our boys' savings locked in. We have those baseline things covered in our current investment strategy. So now our conversation has moved into, are we being aggressive enough with our high risk investment strategy? But that was my question back to him is, I feel like we're not being aggressive enough with the high risk that we're taking with other investment. Like if we look at where we want to go next with our life and what we also want to be able to give back to like family, friends, that's like one of our main goals now is that we have holiday homes, that we have a life that enables us to bring other people in, which is something that we've been able to do so far, but we want to do it more. Then we need to get more aggressive with our the risks that we're taking. And it echoes something I heard personally on a recent podcast, which was it was a money expert who was talking about high net worth thinking. And the point was that he was talking about how a lot of couples will talk about making the small fry savings, things like, do you have to get a coffee from Starbucks every day? And sometimes people say, no, that's not a priority. Let's cut that spending. And his point was, okay, you cut that spending. You're not spending £3 a day on your coffee. And then you get to another year and somebody says, what did you do with all that money that you saved by not going to Starbucks? They'll probably say nothing. Maybe they put it into a bank account that had very limited savings. Why are we spending time on those small questions? Because that is minimal gain. Whereas the question he was talking about is, what's your strategy around your investments? If you were to take a higher percentage, like a 1% increase in your household income into your investment strategy, then what could happen then? Because that is a completely different relationship with money. And it's where your relationship with money starts to compound into wealth. Now, these are the conversations that my husband and I have been having for years now. And it might seem like, yes, it's easier for you to have these conversations now because you are able to talk about investment strategy because that's a point you've got to. We had these conversations on those Sunday walks. That was way before we lived in a 1-bedroom flat at that point. We did not have the assets and the money that we have now, but we still had that same conversation and that same thinking. And I am sharing this with you because the way that you think about money in your personal life and the way that you think about money in your business are not separate. The way that you approach and manage that money does have to be separate. It's a very slippery slope to go down the route of taking money from all your personal savings into your business consistently. I have a very separate financial strategy for my personal and my business. However, the way that I think about it is aligned across both. And if you're in scarcity personally, so you are restricting the amount of spend, you are feeling like you need to kind of perform abundance while feeling terrified that you need this money to come back, that is the energy that you're going to bring into your business as well. It's going to show up in how you price, it's going to show up in how you sell, in how you react or respond when somebody says no to you, in the offers that you're creating, the clients that you're accepting into your spaces. So instead, I want you to really get honest with yourself about how you are genuinely asking questions that expand your thinking about your wealth in your personal life and in your business. So making choices from a place of clarity about what you want and what those conditions need to be in order for that to happen in your personal life and in your business too. It's how you will walk away from a client who's not the right fit. It's how you invest in your brand, in your team, in your growth. Because as I said before, sometimes you are able to, you have the money to be able to invest in something, but is it the right time to do it? Have you created the right conditions in terms of how you're able to show up, in terms of how you are able to make the most of this investment? Are those conditions there? So what I want to leave you with is that wealth thinking isn't about affirmations. I don't believe that it is buying luxury in order to feel like you're in some kind of state of abundance or investing big in order to play big. It's about the choices that you make and the conditions that you set, what you prioritize, what conversations you are having, what conversations you are choosing to walk away from, who you are surrounding yourself with, what rooms you're putting in yourself in, and are you expanding your thinking rather than investing in things to make you look successful? So the question I'll leave you with is, are you putting yourself in expensive environments and hoping that the feeling sticks? Or are you building the conditions that make that abundance inevitable? Those are two very different things. And in my experience, the second one is the one that lasts. And I can say that having built over time through highs and many, many lows, that means that you hold the wealth. You don't just make the money, you hold the wealth as well. Bit of a different conversation for you today. I would love to know any takeaways that you have from this. This is Rich Work, and I will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Rich Work. I'd love it if you left a review. It helps other women to find us. In the meantime, follow me on Instagram at rachelpearson.co for a different take on premium positioning, one that's not about fitting a box. See you next week.